What's up, everyone? As you know, we usually jump right into everything that's happening, but before we get into the Chinese Grand Prix and everything that happened there, we're going to start today's episode off a little bit different. As Formula One fans know, we lost a legend in the sport in Eddie Jordan. Um, Ivan's going to talk about Eddie Jordan and the legacy that he left behind and send our condolences out to his family and all the fans that were influenced by him.
Thank you. It's something that, obviously nobody likes to talk about loss, but with as big of a person as Eddie Jordan was, we felt like it'd be right just to at least acknowledge all he's done for the sport. Eddie Jordan was the original founder of Jordan Racing, a team that took his name. He was one of the first privateers to get racing going in Formula One. When you think about teams like Haas, who have no manufacturer, and other teams like that have come along throughout the years, Eddie is a big influence in that. He was also considered one of the biggest party boys in all of Formula One. That kind of got rid of that image a little bit of, just rich guys racing around a track every week. He kind of made it a fun atmosphere. He even started a band with a lot of the drivers. If they knew how to play an instrument, he told them, come out, play a session or two, and we'd get the job done. That team that he started won a couple of races, eventually was sold because he didn't want the team's employees to have to lose their jobs. So he'd rather sell off the team so everybody could keep their jobs. Multiple sales later, that team still does exist technically today, Team Enstone. That team is now Aston Martin. I don't know if y'all probably noticed this weekend they had a logo on their car in honor of Eddie Jordan. For me personally, Eddie Jordan and his podcast with David Coulthard was one of my favorite podcasts. It still goes on to this day. And the big thing for me was, not to get too personal, but I did have a loss in my family last year going through that difficult time. That was the podcast I listened to all the time, and just listen to Eddie telling stories about all that, how the fun days and how Formula One works and how it can be fun. It's not just technical this, technical that. You can have fun in the sport and be able to have a good time. So, as big of a loss as it is for the F1 community, as Eddie would like, the show must go on. We did at least want to acknowledge all he's done for the sport, and like he would want, as he would want, we're just going to keep on going. And here's another episode of Around the Circuit, presented by Apollo Media.
Chinese Grand Prix happened this weekend, boys. It was a sprint race, so we had the 19-lap sprint, it was, right? Yeah, 19-lap sprint, and then the Grand Prix. There was a lot happening in the Grand Prix. Man, I don't know. There was the ups and the downs of Ferrari. We'll start there. Lewis got his first win in red.
So happy.
He won the sprint, was followed closely by Oscar Piastri and Max Verstappen to close out the top three. And then, I don't know. It was huge because to see Lewis, he hadn't won in so long, minus his win back home last season, which was huge for him. To go that long without a race, to win at home at Silverstone last year, then to leave that team and that legacy he left behind at Mercedes and then go into Ferrari to build a whole new legacy that just kickstart, on fire from the jump. And now in week 2, he gets a win. It's not a Grand Prix win, but it's a sprint win. It's points for the team. It's points for him and the championships. And Mark, you're a Ferrari guy. Before we get into the Grand Prix, how were you feeling after the sprint?
I was feeling really good. Qualifying happened, Lewis got pole, and I was like, okay, let's see if he could get, because obviously last year, same thing happened where it was a sprint race, he got pole, Max eventually took over, but I was like, that's when he was back with Mercedes. It'll be different this time, and it was different this time. Lewis went ahead, and he never looked back. He finished P1, and he won the race, and I was extremely happy. I think Leclerc got 4th in the sprint.
Yeah,
and I was like, this is good. This is a great bounce back considering what happened last week.
Yep.
And I was like, okay, let's see where we can go from here. And it's where the downs happen.
Yeah, we could talk about the sprint, all day and how big it was for win. But going right into the Grand Prix, Ferrari, they didn't have the strongest finish considering what they did in the sprint. They finished P5 and P6. Could have been better. I know Charles had a broken front wing the whole race and still managed to outpace Lewis. And then there was the little spat behind, the radios where they said Lewis suggested they swap. And then when it came time for the actual swap to happen, Charles wasn't close enough for Lewis to, I guess, Lewis wasn't, happy with where Charles was. And he said, we'll tell him to catch up. We'll swap when I say. And it was kind of a moment where, to me, as, I'm not a Ferrari fan, but it was a moment where it kind of was like, okay, Lewis is here and he's calling the shots. Charles, we knew this coming into the season. How are they going to play together with Charles being the golden child brought up from Ferrari and then Lewis takes over? It was like he was calling the shots out there, even though he knew it was the right thing to do with Charles outpacing him. I mean, at the end, did it really matter? I would say maybe not, because Max Verstappen did his thing and ended up taking P4 anyways. And then to see them finish P5, P6, the struggles they had during the Grand Prix. And then for me, I went to sleep after the Grand Prix. It was early. I think the race started at 2 a.m. our time. It finished about 4 a.m. I went back to sleep, and I wake up, and the first notification I see is Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc disqualified from the Grand Prix. I mean, Pierre Gasly also got disqualified, but a double Ferrari DQ was just, to me, is crazy, because that team just can't get out of its own way.
No, you just cannot. Yeah, like I mentioned before with you guys before we started, I fell asleep right before the race started, and I woke up as it ended. And, and I watched the highlights, and I was like, okay, not great, but, P5 and P6 isn't the worst possible outcome.
Yeah.
And so I went back to sleep thinking, okay, not the greatest Grand Prix for Ferrari, but, it could have been worse. It got worse. woke back up, and both Lewis and Charles were disqualified. Not a good weekend. I have nothing else.
It was not the best weekend for Ferrari, and also as a person who my three favorite drivers are Carlos, Pierre, and Lewis. Very bad weekend for me, guys. Was not great. I had the same situation as Junior did. I went to sleep right after the race. I made the horrible decision of trying to stay up and watch that entire race, and I didn't want to turn it off thinking, I would miss something. So I went to sleep right afterwards, and then I wake up seeing two of my three favorite drivers are disqualified from the race. It did help my other favorite driver, and Carlos, finally get his first points for Williams. We'll talk about that a little bit later probably.
Mm-hmm.
For Ferrari, it's, man, you're behind. Speaking of Williams, you're behind Williams right now, or tied with Williams at this point right now. Like, 2 races in the season, you would never have expected that. If anybody who would have called that before the season, you would have said they were on something. So it's definitely a start of the season where you're going to have to, like we said earlier in the preseason preview, you can't have these lows, Ferrari, and you've already blown 2 of your, wild card weekends that you can throw out throughout the season. So they're really going to have to pick it up. Also, maybe this, turning a 2-stop into a 1-stop strategy, this is the second time in second consecutive year we've seen a DNF because of that.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if that's going to start deterring some teams from wanting to go down that route. Now we've seen George Russell and now Charles Leclerc be disqualified just because they changed the strategy they had going into that race. And normally it wouldn't have cost you as much in the past, but nowadays it seems it does.
Yeah. And I'll say, though, that was a huge factor when it came to George's DQ last year. But 1 kilogram underweight is kind of a lot when it comes to an F1 car. It's interesting to see, because that was another big talking point with Lewis going to Ferrari is, are they going to be able to pull their stuff together to carry Lewis and hopefully get him his 8th championship? And 2 races in, it doesn't look good. I know, like I said, we're only 2 races in, but when you look at the championship standings and you see Lance Stroll above Charles and Ferrari, it's kind of shocking. Not only because why are Charles and Lewis that far down, but Stroll has inherited points this race, had points last race. He's two races in a row he's gotten points. Maybe Aston is getting somewhere if they could get Fernando Alonso to finish a race. But back to Ferrari, I mean, it's just, can they fix it fast enough before they fall too far behind? Because McLaren, Lando seemed to struggle in the sprint, but when it came to picking up the pace for Grand Prix, I mean, Oscar was there, Lando was there. McLaren's going to run away with the constructors pretty quick if Ferrari and Red Bull can't get their stuff together. Now, Mercedes is still there. George has quietly had 2 pretty good races in a row.
Yeah.
Like Mark said last week, we really didn't hear his name much of the race last week until all of a sudden, he inherited that podium. This week, he had a pretty good drive. I'll give it to him. I'm not the biggest George fan, but I'll give it to him. He had a pretty good drive. But Kimi, too. I mean, we can't talk enough about the rookies and how well they've all done. I don't know about y'all, but so far I think Kimi is probably my favorite rookie to watch because he almost doesn't look like a rookie out there. He is very confident in that Mercedes, and I don't know if it's the Mercedes itself and how comfortable that car is for him, or he's just that good. I don't know. What are y'all's thoughts on that?
I mean, that was definitely the expectation Mercedes had coming into this season that Kimi would do good. Kimi is just coming in. That was the expectation for Mercedes and for a lot of fans is for Kimi to immediately do well. Obviously, I thought, okay, maybe he'd start off slow, but no. Kimi has done extremely well. He looks like a veteran out there with how he's driving, and it's been extremely impressive. Another rookie that I was impressed with this past race is Ollie Behrman. Ollie Behrman finally gets his points, and Haas, double points for Haas.
Yeah.
Ollie Behrman, man, I've been saying it this whole time that I've been looking forward to Ollie Behrman finally in F1, and it's been great so far.
As a person who normally doesn't root for anything Red Bull, Isaac Hadjar has been a very, very good surprise.
Yes.
Especially after coming off of the devastation from last week that we talked about, him having to overcome the adversity of just shaking last week off, rolling into a new weekend, and just seeing how things go. RB, if they could just get their race strategy together, they could be in front of Ferrari right now themselves, and they could be in front of Williams even at this point.
Yeah, the Racing Bulls have made some questionable choices.
It's been frustrating because I'm not even the person that openly roots for that team. I root for Yuki because I think he got, I think he should have gotten the seat. But overall, that team, if they can get their race strategy together, it's something that once they get it clicking, I feel like they are 2 drivers right there that are very underrated, both of them. Mm-hmm. They're both great in qualifying, and as Yuki's been showing, he's great in race pace, and Hadjar wasn't too far off of that this week.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said, the Racing Bulls, their strategy, it's weird because I saw something today where they said that their strategy has roughly cost Yuki 18 points in the championship. 18 points is a lot because we've seen championships come down to the very last point. 18 points is a lot, and I mean, we don't see teams score 18 points in a whole season sometimes. And Yuki has been – I'm a Yuki fan. I like Yuki. He's one of my top 5 drivers to watch. He's been driving his butt off, and he just keeps running into the bad luck. I mean, even with the weird 2-stop strategy where the Racing Bulls expected other teams to make 2 stops and they were hoping to get the undercut, he went out on the second stint and his front wing just snapped. And so
I had
even
never
he was
seen
shocked
anything
when
like
they
that.
called him
That
to pit.
was insane.
They said, pit, front wing damage. He said, front wing damage from where? And when you watch the replay, he got behind, I want to say it was Stroll or one of the Astons, and you just seen it just break under pressure. And so, I mean, I guess if Yuki didn't have bad luck, he wouldn't have any luck at all right now. It was just interesting to see. Does he even have to worry about that in the coming weeks? Liam Lawson has underperformed in every possible way. He qualified P20 in the sprint. He qualified P20 for the Grand Prix. He did terrible last week. Ended up DNFing. This week, I think he still, even after the 3 Qs, wasn't in the points. He finished, P15? Inherited P12 after the DQs. It's like, man, what are they – that's the headlines right now when it comes to Red Bull. Is Liam Lawson going to get dropped for Yuki? Is the swap going to happen? We've seen other rumors with the Racing Bulls. I don't know. I mean, for me, I thought Yuki deserved a seat to start, and I know we've all kind of agreed on that. Yeah. So to see Liam struggle this much, we've known Christian Horner to have a fast trigger and pull those guys out of the seats. We've seen it happen to Alex Albon. We've seen it happen to Pierre Gasly. I mean, what do y'all think? Is the seat's hot? But does it happen? I don't know.
I think it does happen. I don't know when, but I think it definitely will happen. And being a Checo fan from last year,
Revenge.
revenge. Y'all use them as a scapegoat, saying it was Checo's fault when this whole time Checo was saying that the second car was having problems.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just being real. The car is mainly built for Verstappen.
Yeah.
They're mainly focusing on Verstappen, and that second car has just been cursed for anybody else that has been to Red Bull. And so yeah, Liam's just not been doing good. And I like Liam. I really do like Liam. I just have the problem obviously because he took over Checo.
Yeah.
And I wanted Yuki in that second Red Bull seat. But Lawson has had his problems so far through the season, and I know it's early, but they're big problems. You're in the Red Bull, and you're at the bottom of the barrel. Like, kick Saubers are passing you. Like, that shouldn't happening.
I think when I saw, I think it was Ollie overtake him in a Haas, I was like, no, something's got to change.
Yeah. So, yeah, I definitely think the swap will happen. When, I have no idea, but I think it could be sooner than later.
Yeah.
I do think it's going to happen. I don't think it'll happen as soon as some people are saying.
Yeah.
Liam has done 2 races for Red Bull, 3 if you count a sprint. He has yet to start on the grid. He started in the pit lane for every single race so far. That is something that's 3 races in, you should have at least had 1 grid start by now. That's something that he's going to have to pick up. Qualifying, I think, is struggling more than the race. At least in the race, he can move up a couple positions. In the qualifying, he can't get out of P20 right now. And I do think Red Bull has that problem with that. Every other team tends to develop their car with feedback from both of their drivers, and I'm sure they took feedback from Checo and other drivers in the past. But it seems like at Red Bull, they take their feedback 90-10. 90% of the feedback is from Max, 10% is from the other driver on how it could help him drive Max's car better.
Yeah.
And they are the only team on the grid that seems to do that, and I feel like now it's finally starting to catch up with them. Even at Ferrari, you have a driver like Lewis coming in who's I know a 7-time champion, but still, he can adapt to the car fast because they made it at least adaptable for 2 drivers. Williams, same thing with Carlos. He's having a difficult time, but at least he can at least be in position to get some points once in a while. Red Bull, there is no in between. And you even have Max saying this week, oh, no, I feel like if you put Liam back in the RB, he'd be faster.
Yeah.
Which is ridiculous to say if you put somebody on the junior team that you would feel like they'd go faster.
Yeah.
But it's – I don't know. With you as the Red Bull fan, Junior, do you think it's starting to come back and bite him in the butt now of developing only around 1 driver, or what's going on there?
So I think it goes back to as far as 2023. I know we all watched Drive to Survive, and we remember that clip where the team principals were having an interview, and Christian and Toto got into it, and Toto told him, Checo's been telling you the car is shit. Fix your car. And Christian took offense to that and said, hey, you let me worry about my car. If you have a problem with yours, fix your car. Don't worry about my drivers. Don't talk to my drivers. And then when the balance issues really kicked off towards the middle of last season, they tracked the problem all the way down to an upgrade they did in 2023. So Checo was right, and he said the car was struggling. Max is just an animal and drove that car to win 19 Grand Prix. Even after the problem started to surface, it was easy for him. Things that are easy for Max Verstappen aren't easy for every other driver. So it was easy for him to take the car and still win. When Checo started having issues, it should have been an indicator, but like you said, you're winning championships right now and you're dominating. Why am I going to worry? Don't worry about it. We'll fix it. Just keep helping Max. And Checo still drove the hell out of that car in the second half of 2023. But then you get into 2024, they start the season off right, and then one bad upgrade on top of the other, and the season started to go downhill. Checo had his struggles. He was crashing every other race. He was struggling in qualifying to get out of Q2. Sometimes Q1. And so it makes you wonder, like you said, if they would have listened to Checo back then, where would they be now? And I think now they have recognized it, and I think that's Liam's saving grace, is that until they actually start to make progress on the car, which I think is going to come sooner than later, I think Max has started to kind of pinpoint. Max has been in the engineering room with the engineers trying to find the pace on the car. The balance is fine. They fixed the balance problem they had last year, but to fix the pace, he's in there and he's grinding, trying to figure it out, is what Christian has said, I think, last week. Excuse me. But to get to where both drivers are going to be able to drive that car, I think they're still a few weeks off. My best bet is because Max has been my best guess is because Max has been vocal about how bad that car is, and Christian and both Max have kind of defended Liam. Now, Christian did kind of beat around the bush yesterday when he was asked, is the swap going to happen? All he said was the generic, oh, we got a lot of data. We made some changes to his car specifically before quali. That's why he started after quali, that's why he started from the pit. So they got a lot of data. They're going to analyze it, and before they make any decisions, they're going to review everything. I think they're going to give him a couple races, 3-4 races, but I think they're still going to have that fast trigger because they can't wait too long. If he continues to struggle, they got to figure something out, make a change, and try to figure something out because same thing with Ferrari. If the lulls continue, those championship points don't come back as the season goes on. So I think initially they let the Max Verstappen factor, as Marco calls it, the Max Verstappen factor has carried the team quite a ways. It carried them through the rest of 2023. It carried them through 2024 where Max still won the Drivers' Championship. I think that it's still carrying them to where Max is still finishing top 3, top 4, and getting big points. But then you got Liam down here. A lot of people were saying the switch could happen in Japan. I think he's still got another race or two before they make that switch. I think once the switch happens, now we heard I talked to y'all about in the group chat about the rumors. The Racing Bulls are being linked to Franco Colapinto again. I think Liam, it sucks to be him because you have Max Verstappen as your partner, and that's who you're compared to, even if he is driving this tractor to the top of the standings. If he doesn't fix it and he gets swapped, even going down to the Racing Bulls, he's still in the hot seat. And we can only hope, if you're a Liam Lawson fan, that Max is right and that he goes into a Racing Bull and he's faster, because that car is fast. Yeah. Isaac and Yuki are flying in that thing. They're towards the top of the midfield, contenders. If Liam doesn't perform even in the Racing Bulls, I think he's out of Red Bull completely. And that's where I stand. Is his saving grace is Max has been vocal about the car. Yeah. But if he doesn't get it together, it's still going to happen. I mean, we know Christian Horner, and we know he's not going to stand by it as much as he tries to defend his drivers. Eventually, the change will come.
Yeah. For me, it's just been like an avalanche. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Mark, or anything.
No, you're good.
But so for me, it's just been like an avalanche. Liam did not do himself any favors when the way he's conducted himself a little bit.
Absolutely.
He's kind of started an avalanche where, all right, you've angered a couple of different fan bases by the way you acted your first half season. You were here last year. Now you're underperforming. And now Red Bull, this is the other question I had. So you get rid of Checo because you want a driver that can get you a better positions, but you need to develop the car more. So you put a driver in with only 13 races experience compared to Yuki or maybe going to get a Carlos Sainz, who have a lot more experience than him and can help you develop this car a lot better. Mm-hmm. The decision-making by Red Bull has just kind of been like they're trying to put pretty much a Band-Aid on a really bad wound. It's like, okay, we can just try to do this and it'll fix everything. They've got to step back and just say, we've got to take this year to fix everything and to be ready for 2026, because similar people are similar. A lot of people have been saying, if Max does choose to leave or, choose to take a year off because of the birth of his child coming up, mm-hmm. What does that do for Red Bull? That leaves you two drivers then who don't know how to drive a car that is designed for a driver who literally has developed this car over the past 4 or 5 years to a point where mm-hmm. now it kind of seems like there's no point of return for this car. Either they've got to develop it with two drivers in mind, or Max has got to figure out a different way to drive, which for him, obviously he's one of the best drivers in the world. He probably can do it, but is he willing to take that step to want to learn how to drive a different way?
Yeah, I mean, it's in his contract that there's performance clauses in his contract. If the team isn't performing and winning, he can bounce. Now, with the cars changing so drastically going into 2026, where does that leave? It's almost, he said it's almost going to be an engine battle going into 2026 until they nail down all the specifics. And I think the problem is there's rumors where the rules for 2026 are only going to last a couple years, and now they're eyeing the return of like V10s. So I don't know. That's a whole nother subject, but there are, like you said, where does Red Bull go if they lose Max? If he goes to another team, if he decides to take a year off, with the birth of his kid, Red Bull, and I think they're realizing it this year, and I think that's, like I said, that's going to be Liam's saving grace, at least for these first few races, that they know the car is bad, and they're doing everything they can to fix it finally now to have two drivers. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see where they go from here, and if they do make the swap sooner than later, if Yuki jumps in it and just drives the hell out of it, you know what I mean? Like, where do they go? I think, the curse of Danny Ricciardo is real, because that seat hasn't been steady since he left, other than those few dominant years where Checo was the perfect number 2 driver until the car had issues. So I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of questions. I look at it every day because, like I said, as a Max fan, I want him to win his 5th championship. And he's already said he don't care about breaking records, so we don't know how many more years we have with Max. He's already said there's a chance after his kid's born that he only races till the end of his contract, and then he's gone. So I don't know. I think, like you said, it's going to be interesting to see where they go, and if they do end up with no driver, what do they do then? But flipping over to my second favorite driver, Carlos Sainz, got in the points today, and as I told y'all, my agenda that Williams is back is still well and alive. But also, did we have Alex Albon outperforming Carlos every week so far? Granted, it's only 2 races in, but did we have Alex Albon out driving Carlos so far?
I mean, not at all. I thought Sainz was going to come in and be the better driver. No, Albon, like I said last week, Albon came in and said, hold on, I've been here longer. This is my number 1 seat, and I'm going to defend it. And he's been driving amazingly so far in the season. And, I mean, Carlos has been doing good, but he needs to step it up just a little bit. He hasn't been doing the best, but he just needs to step it up a little bit.
I do think I didn't have that on the cards at all for Albon, but I am happy that he's doing so. Kind of shocked considering all the competition he had previously. Maybe this was a good step up for him to be like, all right, now I have a real teammate, now I have real competition. Mm-hmm. And this is just a random thought coming off of the Red Bull conversation we just had too. Do you really think Williams was taking development feedback from Logan and Latifi? Or since Albon's been there for a couple of years, it's kind of like a similar situation to Max where they're like, Albon, you're the only driver that's been getting us points, man. Can you tell us how you would like the car developed? We'll make you a car. Not expecting them to sign a driver of the caliber of Carlos Sainz's talents. And now all of a sudden they have a driver that's really, really good, and both drivers can get the points. But you have a driver now that you kind of developed the car around mostly because, like I said, you had 2 other drivers that were doing subpar previously. Mm-hmm. I do think Carlos is eventually going to catch on. He's too good of a driver not to catch on. Absolutely. But I think you're seeing like the pros and the cons of switching teams from both Lewis and Carlos. Yeah. Lewis is showing you, if you have a team that you switch to and you can click in right away, results can start happening right away. But Carlos is the opposite side. If you do switch teams and you're having a little bit of struggles adapting to the car, it can be a long start to the season. Mm-hmm. I do think later on in the year, like I said, he'll find a way to pick it up. Probably by the time we go to the British Grand Prix or something like that, Red Bull Ring, he'll be better off by then. I do think it's going to take a couple more weeks for him to get off of this lull. But for Williams as a whole, I'm happy for the team. They're a team that deserves. You can see them fighting, kind of like a Haas situation. You've seen them fight their way up to the top. These teams that are in the back of the grid, they don't want to stay back there. They want to improve. So it's good to see them making those improvements and, just taking step by step each week. You can see how the team is getting better. And honestly, shout out to James Vowles. He's been legitimately one of the best things to ever happen to that Williams team.
Absolutely.
He really bought that Mercedes mentality over to Williams, and they've been a whole different program since he got there.
Yeah, I mean, and Toto was very vocal about how vital James was to the success in that dominant 8 years of Mercedes. He was, and to go get his own team and to pretty much handpick his own drivers. He got Alex, he got now he's got Carlos, but also I think we talk about Carlos's struggles I think a lot of the development into the car this year, the change from bottom of the standings to fighting fighting for a top place in the midfield and 2 races in outscoring Ferrari. I mean, I think a lot of that comes from Carlos's knowledge. He might be struggling in the car because he's still adapting, he's still getting used to it. I mean, he drove a Ferrari for 2-3 years, and then he goes to a Williams. He's still adapting, and so naturally, the struggles are going to be there. But I don't think we can overlook that he came in and this team made a drastic change. Yeah, Alex is a great driver, and he's helped get them to that point too. But to have such a drastic change over the winter like that, I think we got to give Carlos his flowers, because what else was the big change other than that? And they were vocal about it in race 1 in Australia, where Carlos was running back and forth from the pit wall to the engineers and everything, back and forth, trying to help make calls to help Alex have the best race possible. Tell him when to put the inners back on after they went to slicks, because he knew the rain was going to hit. He's playing driver, strategist, and almost engineer all at once right now for Williams. And I might be a little overzealous and giving him way too much credit, but I might not be, because I do love, like I said, Carlos is probably my second favorite driver on the grid, and to see where he's brought that team, I say he because of the drastic change. It's just, you knew it sucked to see him go from such a high performing team to such a bottom team, but Williams has the legacy. Williams has the winning history. If he could get them to even close to that, it would be a complete success, no matter where he goes after that, or if he rides out his career with Williams. So I don't know. I said it last week. I'm saying it again. Williams is back, and I can't wait to see where they find. I mean, in 2 races, they've already matched their total points that they had all last season. So call me what you want, say what you want, but Williams is back.
I'm with you, man. We saw it immediately after the end of last season. Carlos in the car with the engineers, working with them the next day. I mean, when I saw that, I was like, okay, Williams could be doing big moves next year. And, yeah, so far it's been great seeing Carlos and Albon, and it's just the beginning. I can imagine that they're going to score many more points throughout the season.
Yeah.
I'll do it for y'all. Williams is back. With the way Alpine started the year off and some other teams, I know Haas had a rebound race after the horrible race they had in Australia, but I do think they're going to be best of the rest. We're up there with RB. They're kind of lucky, to be honest, that RB has done so bad. Racing Bulls has done such a terrible job at their race strategy that they've, like you said, cost Yuki so many points already. Alex has already scored as many points as he scored in all of last season. Yep. This team is a completely different team. And having a person like Carlos there, I think, has helped, even though the results for him personally haven't shown. Just him having him on the team radio. And I know he's never going to admit it, but I know he had that dial turn to the Ferrari team radio whenever they were leading in Australia and said, no, we're going to do the opposite of what these guys do. I've been there. I've done that. They're going to start inventing. I don't want to deal with that stuff again.
Absolutely.
So I do think he's helping the team out a lot. And I think you just got to give a lot more credit to Alex Albon, because ironically, another person that's on the grid that's been shocking people, George Russell. George Russell kind of started the process for Williams to be taken a little bit more seriously. And then he's worked his way now to Alex Albon. And he's continued what George Russell started pretty much over there. And the last thought I had about this was, because I didn't even think about this, you have a person like James Vowles in charge of this team, who's came over from Mercedes, who's had a lot of winning tradition over there, so he knows how to win. And you have a person over there also at Mercedes who helped Lewis win all these championships with Bono. Think of that dream team that they had there at some point at Mercedes. It was literally Bono, James Vowles, Toto Wolff.
I mean, Constructor Championships kind of prove it.
Yeah, like when you look at it, in hindsight now, you're like, how did that team not win all those championships? But now you're looking at it, you're like, no, they had some dogs in there. They knew what they were doing. So being able to bring over a James Vowles, and he's just changed the whole mentality of that team to say, we can't make excuses anymore. We can't be using XL for our parts. We got to step up our game and move in.
Exactly what Claire Williams wanted to do.
Yes,
and what she wanted to happen for her dad's team.
Yep, and like we said, we were big fans of Claire Williams here. We knew the direction she wanted to go, but at some point, you know the limitations of what you have in this sport, especially.
Yeah.
So to be able to bring this team it hasn't been a quick job, but be able to have patience. I mean, even for him to give Logan a second year, I felt like that was pretty cool. I mean, we're talking about Liam losing a seat in 2 races, and freaking Logan got 2 whole years of what he was dealing with. So you can't say this man isn't patient or at least willing to play the long game. So this whole team in general, I think they're back just because they've done everything the right way. They've tried to do the slow and steady pace. They saw it wasn't happening. They brought in a driver like Carlos Sainz, and they're like, no, we're here now. We can speed up this process a lot more now.
Absolutely. Next race is going to be the Japanese Grand Prix. No race this weekend. We got a weekend break to kind of
I'm free
catch
from
our breath.
Ferrari.
You're free from the Ferrari hurt. Yeah, we're gonna catch our breath this weekend. We're gonna lead into the Japanese Grand Prix. So next week we'll cover all the preview of Japan. Any news that might break when it comes to Red Bull or any other drivers. Any last thoughts on the Chinese Grand Prix before we wrap it up, leading into Japan in 2 weeks?
I mean, not really. I mean, we said everything we wanted to say. I mean, I'm just hoping that Ferrari is going to take big steps. Because, man, this
For real.
You need to take the big steps because you need those points. If you want to compete with McLaren, you need those points right now, and you need to lock in.
Absolutely.
For me, shockingly, we haven't talked about him a lot, but that's because, it's been a lot going on in the sport. Shout out Oscar Piastri. Championship fight is on, it seems like.
Yeah.
They have two number one drivers, like they said. So Oscar's going to make sure that stays like that and he doesn't become a number 2.
Yeah.
Both drivers know at McLaren, and this is what I'm most excited for Japan, honestly. Both drivers know the second one of them gets a lead, the other one's going to have to become the number 2 because they're going to want to focus on getting one of them the driver's championship.
Of course.
So they're literally saying, okay, if I just win what's in front of me or finish ahead of my teammate, I'm good.
And I think it's safe to say, even with Oscar's finish and the mishap he had going off last week in Australia, Oscar has out-driven Lando both weeks. Lando's up there. He's driving, a rocket ship. But in my opinion, Oscar's out-driven Lando both times, both weekends, especially the sprint, Grand Prix. I don't know. It's going to be a fun fight to watch them two as teammates battle at the top, but also have George Russell and Max Verstappen and maybe the Ferrari boys come in and jump in that fight. It's wrapping. We knew it was going to be one of the most competitive seasons so far, and so far it 2 weeks in this season has been cinema.
Yeah, it's definitely lived up to the hype this season so far. Like we said, it's going to be a good year. We're looking forward to the rest of the year. Like we said, China was one of those races where honestly there wasn't a lot of passing on track. But when it did occur, in the instance of like Behrman saying ciao and everything, there was a couple of actions left and right on the track. You had to look out for it a little bit more. Big goal for me for the next race. I'm also a fan of Alonso. Fernando Alonso, one of the legends of the sport. Just finish the race, man. I just want to see you cross that finish line. I don't care if you're not in the points. Just get the dang car across the finish line, and we'll see how it goes from there. Because I think Aston, if Lance can do this right now, I want to know what Fernando can do in the car when it's properly working, or is Lance is taking a step up that's been like 4 years in the waiting. So we'll have to see what's going on there.
Yeah. I think last bit I had was my favorite fights to see on the track at any time is Max Verstappen versus Charles Leclerc. It's always a great fight to watch them go at it. I think because they both come up together for so long, just anytime they get on, they get next to each other, it's the moves that happen. I mean, Max Verstappen's pass on him to move up to the P4 during the race, for me, was outstanding. Maybe not so much for you. Didn't really matter afterwards.
No, not at all.
That's my last bit. Is I just love watching them, and hopefully there's no more incidents in the race. But yeah, we'll wrap it up with that. We'll be back next week to preview the Japanese Grand Prix. As always, I'm Junior, joined by Mark and Ivan.
Yes, sir.
And we're the boys over at Around the Circuit. We'll catch y'all next week. We're out.
Ciao.
Peace.
Ciao.